This morning we are continuing our exploration, reflections upon the figure, John the Baptist, who appears far more frequently within the Gospels than we often imagine. We think of him typically at the River Jordan with that baptism of Jesus, but John continues to make appearances, and throughout those appearances and our encounters with him, we come to see something that is very urgent and very powerful about this gospel proclamation. So we continue to read in the gospel according to Luke, and let us now hear the word of our God. So, with many other exhortations, John the Baptist proclaimed the good news to the people. But Herod the ruler, who had been rebuked by him because of Herodias, his brother's wife, and because of all the evil things that Herod had done, added to them all by shutting up John in prison. Do you know what the sign of a real and deep friendship is? I've come to think about this, and let me tell you my sense of what marks a true friendship. A real friend is one who's going to tell you something that you do not want to hear, but that you really need to hear. Oftentimes we think of friends as the people that we can go to with our concerns, and they will say, yes, you're right, I agree, yes, yes, yes. That is a common sense of friendship, simply agreeing to what the other person is saying, or simply affirming the choices and the actions of the other person. But being a real friend, being a true friend, is one who sometimes needs to say no. No, you shouldn't have said that. No, you shouldn't have done that. And why is that kind of word delivered to a friend? Is it a sign of belittlement? Is it a sign of lordship, if you will, over the other person? No, that kind of word in which the truth is spoken to a friend ultimately arises out of a love for that person and a genuine concern for that person, in which you want that person to know the truth and to understand the truth. When you're friends, it's not easy to say no to someone that you care about very deeply. It's not easy to say no, because we often think that a good friend is really someone who is simply going to affirm what the other person is saying or the other person is doing. We don't want to make our friend angry. We don't want to risk losing that relationship if we say something that is going to be unpopular. But really, I believe, a sign of genuine caring, a sign of deep love, is speaking the truth to that other person. They may not want to hear it, but chances are they need to hear that word. And so we could call that message good news. We could call that message good news because it is spoken for the sake of our friend. It is spoken for the sake of our loved one. It may not be easy to hear. We may prefer to avoid it, but it really is good news. And so the gospel is very, very similar in that regard. It is good news. It is a word that may not be received well, but it is a word that is needed. And this is what I think we might call a prophetic word. Now, when we hear the word prophecy, when we hear things described as prophetic, typically we think about a word that is going to predict the future. That a prophecy is a word that is spoken about something that is going to come. We often think about prophecy as simply being kind of the same as a prediction. And certainly, while we find that kind of language in the Bible, I think that at its core, a prophetic word is a word that speaks the truth in a particular time, in a particular place, but in a particular moment. A prophetic word does not simply speak about the future, but a prophetic word is directed to the need of the present moment. And so, friendship, true friendship, may be defined by the speaking of a prophetic word to your friend. A word of truth. A word of truth that is offered for the sake of your friend, so that they might know what is really true, what is really good, what is really needed. The prophetic word is a word of truth, and in that way, the prophetic word is good news. The word that Jesus will deliver, we say, is a word of truth. We might say that it is a then prophetic word, and we might call it good news. The same with John the Baptist, who is described as the forerunner. That is, the one who is preparing the way for the Messiah. The words that John the Baptist will speak are words that are for the sake of truth. They are truth-telling words, and in that way, they are prophetic words, and as they are prophetic words, they are words that bring good news. And so Luke writes, with many exhortations, John proclaimed the good news to the people. Keep in mind that the good news is not always the easy news. The good news is not always what you want to hear, but the good news is what you need to hear. John gets in trouble. This is what happens a lot when you speak good news. When you speak a prophetic word, when you speak a word of true friendship, it's often rejected, and when the word is rejected, you are often rejected as well. And that is what happens here when John speaks to Herod. Now, Herod is a puppet king. Of course, the Romans were in control at this time, but we learn from the historian Josephus that Herod, when his brother died, Herod married his brother's wife. Now, normally that would seem to be okay. However, his brother's wife was actually Herod's niece. And so Herodias, who is mentioned here, is the niece of Herod, who is then the wife of Herod. Now this was, this incestuous relationship was considered illegitimate. It was considered not an appropriate relationship. So John the Baptist, he's going around and he's making all kinds of proclamations. He's addressing the people. He's addressing the community in his words of preparation for the coming of the Messiah. And so, when he encounters Herod and Herodias, he gives this prophetic word that their relationship is not appropriate. Now, he's doing that for their sake. He's doing that not because, you can imagine, not because it's easy, but because it is a word they need to hear. And so it is a prophetic word. And what happens here? He's thrown into prison. He's thrown into prison because the king and the queen, they reject what he is saying. They do not simply reject his message, but they reject him as a person, as one delivering that message, and he is then thrown into prison. This is what often happens when you tell the truth. This is a very dramatic example, but this is often what happens, and sometimes it prevents us from saying what needs to be said, whether it is to a friend or whether it is to the world at large. Because you see, a prophetic word, as it is speaking to a situation, can truly be, inescapably be, a word of judgment. Now, we are reluctant then to offer this prophetic word because we are reluctant to make a word of judgment. That is something that it's often very, very hard for people within the church to do because we are told not to judge others. But throughout the Bible, we see in the Old Testament and in the example of John the Baptist and in the example of Jesus himself, we see these prophetic words, which are words of judgment. But it's hard for us, because I think there are two different ways that we may understand what a judgment is. The judgment which is condemned by Jesus is the kind of word in which one is elevated at the expense of the other. Think about the Pharisees whom Jesus encounters. They are very, very good at making judgments. But are these judgments really prophetic words for the sake of the community or for the sake of that person? Think about perhaps the two most well-known examples of judgments offered by the Pharisees. The first is the tax collector. The tax collector Zacchaeus, who's up in the tree. Tax collectors were considered very, very bad people because they took money and then they gave it to the Romans. Well, Zacchaeus is up in a tree because he wants to be able to see Jesus coming into town. Jesus looks up at him and says, Zacchaeus, come on down, I'm going to dine in your house today. The Pharisees are outraged. They say, how can you eat with a sinner? Because you see, the word of judgment in that regard elevates the Pharisees. They are better than Zacchaeus. Typically, these kinds of words of judgment are words in which one elevates oneself as pure and casts the other into the dust as a sinner. Now, perhaps the other very famous example of this is the woman who has been discovered to be in an adulterous relationship. We don't know where the guy is, but the story centers on the woman. She is considered a sinner. Judgment is pronounced upon her, and she's about to be executed. But we know how Jesus intervenes. But think about the judgment that is placed upon her functions in the very same way. The people who are making the judgment are elevating themselves as pure, and they are casting her literally into the dust as wicked, as a sinner. These are the kinds of judgments. They are not prophetic. They are not directed toward the transformation of the person, toward their well-being, but rather they are judgments that leave a person in the dust, shamed, embarrassed, excluded, or even in the case of that woman, almost executed. And so you see, we are often reluctant to make the kind of judgments that we see with the prophets, or with John the Baptist, or with Jesus himself, because we are concerned about judging others. But there is that kind of judgment that we see with the Pharisees. But we see that this prophetic word that John the Baptist delivers, he's not elevating himself up. He's not saying to Herod or Herodias, I'm better than you, I'm pure. He is speaking to them, simply delivering a word of truth for their sake. He is saying to them, this incestuous relationship that you have, it's not appropriate. Change. Just like when a friend says to another, I don't think you should be doing that, or I don't agree with you. When a friend says that to another, it's not because the friend is elevating him or herself with that inflated sense of purity. No, it is to speak a truth that will transform the individual. Speaking the truth is a prophetic word, and it is good news because it transforms the present moment. And in that, of course, there is an element of judgment in which one is saying, that's not good, that's not right, but here's a better way. Here's a better way. When the woman who had been found in adultery, do you think those people were saying, oh, let us help you out of this situation? No, they were going to kill her. When Jesus dined with Zacchaeus, did they see Jesus and Zacchaeus thinking like, Zacchaeus, he's a human being too? No. They saw Zacchaeus as simply as a sinner, and they wanted him cast out. But a prophetic word, a truly prophetic word, is a judgment that transforms. It is a judgment that brings forth new life. But there's a cost. There is a price that is often paid when that word of judgment is made. Because often it's unpopular. Often, like I said, it's not what people want to hear, but it is what they need to hear. To be led into what is true and to what is good. To be led into what is the light, if you will. That is a prophetic word. That is a word that judges this moment for the sake of something better, for the sake of something true, for the sake of something good. So we need to be able to distinguish judgments in which we lift ourselves up at the expense of the other, and a judgment that is directed for the well-being of that other person. In our society today, we are living in very, very dark times. We are living in very, very dark times in which we are seeing the kind of Pharisee-type judgments being made upon entire communities of people. If the Pharisees said to the woman in adultery, "You are a sinner, but we are pure," today we are seeing those kinds of judgments made across this nation. And now the dynamic is, we are the insiders, we are the Americans, and you are the outsiders, and like Zacchaeus, you need to be cast out. That is what we are seeing today. The flashpoint, of course, is Minneapolis. Just a couple of weeks ago, 2 members of the Karen community in Minneapolis, it's a very large Karen community, were illegally detained by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement people, illegally detained and immediately sent to a detention center far away in Texas to isolate those 2 people, to isolate them from community and from support and from legal assistance. I've had many conversations over the last 2 weeks about what we are seeing in our nation. Many conversations with members of our church. Last Sunday, I had an opportunity to speak to the members of our Karen community at the beginning of the Karen service. Because worry is high, concern is high, anxiety is high, because we are seeing the kind of Pharisaic judgment being inflicted upon so many communities within this nation right now. We're seeing that, and it's being played out with this dynamic. We are the insiders, you are the outsiders. We are legal and you are illegal. We belong here, you do not belong here. And so, it is for the church to counter that with the kind of truth-telling judgment that we see with John the Baptist. This is an application of this story for us, because this issue is relevant to us here as a congregation. We are blessed with many, many people who have come from abroad. Many people are worried right now. Many people are very, very concerned about their daily lives here in the United States. And so, a good word is needed. A prophetic word is needed. A word that pronounces judgment upon evil for the sake of transformation is needed. John the Baptist gives us a model, not simply for the big political issues of our day, but gives us a model for our daily lives and interactions as well. Over and over again, we are called within our relationships, we are called within our communities to say what needs to be said, even though people do not want it to be said. What is the true sign of a friend? A friend is someone who speaks the truth to the other. A friend is someone who speaks the truth for the sake of that person, so that they may be brought into the light. That is good news. That is what John the Baptist is doing here. We see that there is a price to pay when you speak the truth. But it is the calling of the church, in ways large and small, in ways simple and complicated. It is the calling of the church to bring forth the kinds of exhortations that were proclaimed throughout the ages by the people of God. It's not easy, but it is necessary for the sake of those around us, for the sake of those within our church, for the sake of those within vulnerable communities. It is for the church to walk in the footsteps of the Baptist. It is for the church to bring forth exhortations of truth, exhortations of goodness, exhortations of reconciliation. So let us be good friends to one another. Let us say what needs to be said for the sake of our neighbor, for the sake of our society. Let us do that in the spirit of the one who has gone before us, the one who said, prepare the way, make your paths straight. The paths are still crooked, and the paths are there for us to walk upon and indeed to straighten. Amen.